Hi, I'm Peter J. Shield. Welcome to my world of unexplained mysteries, Vegas style. As some of you may know, I travel the world in search of the strange, the unusual, and the unexplained. It was therefore only natural that I should decide to settle here in fabulous Las Vegas. I mean, where else could you arrange to be married by Count Dracula himself, in a graveyard at midnight? Well, believe it or not, it's possible right here in Las Vegas. And would you believe, at the Gay Chapel of Las Vegas?
Marriage is a beautiful and holy estate, construed in the time of man's companions. It's truly a marvelous adventure, a journey taken by two. However, it is a commitment to live together, to love together, to work to surmount all of life's challenges together. The happiness that may actually be seen is made real when there is the utmost surrender of yourself and your hearts to each other.
I want to thank the Vegas Wedding Chapel, Viva Las Vegas Wedding Chapel, to be correct, for allowing us to film this remarkable footage of a wedding that could only take place here in Las Vegas. On the subject of strange, where else in Nevada would a senator named Bob Coffin name a bill Dracula because his bill refused to stay dead? This report is courtesy the Las Vegas Sun. Dracula and Other Bills Refused to Stay Dead by Aaron Neef. Carson City, when the legislative session begins winding down, lawmakers begin looking for vehicles. Not the ones that will drive them 426 miles back to Clark County, but the ones that will move their beloved proposals from death's door back into the realm of possibility. Senator Bob Coffin, Las Vegas, called Senate Bill 308 Dracula because the proposal that local governments hate has reemerged in a Senate tax proposal. However, I digress. What of Dracula himself? Was the subject of today's program real, or just a figment of Hollywood's imagination? Today we'll examine the true Count Dracula. Was he for real? Or, as I said a moment ago, a figment of Hollywood's imagination? The very first appearance of Count Dracula is in Bram Stoker's novel, called, of course, Dracula and published in 1897. But did Stoker not make up the name Dracula? There was a Dracula in the 15th century called Vlad the Impaler. Stoker didn't know much about him, but he came across his name in a book he was researching entitled An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, and published in 1820. This book has a very short section on Dracula, who fought against the Turks. Apparently, what attracted Stoker to the name Dracula was a footnote by Wilkinson which stated that Dracula in Wallachian language means devil. Not quite accurate, but that's what Stoker saw and copied into his story. He was originally going to call his vampire Count Wampire, but changed it to Count Dracula. This change is recorded in Stoker's own notes for Dracula, which are located at the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. The real Dracula, about whom we know much more than Stoker ever did, was a count. But was he a vampire, or ever associated with vampires? The two Draculas have become greatly confused in many people's minds. My thoughts are that Stoker was not, as many think, inspired by accounts of Vlad the Impaler to create the character of Count Dracula. There's no evidence for that. In spite of the attention paid to Vlad by historians both in Romania and in the West, he is still, to some extent, an enigma. Even his name is a matter of disagreement. While there's plenty of evidence that he himself used the name Dracula or variations of it, and was referred to as such in several 15th and 16th century sources, many Romanian historians insist on using the name Tipis, meaning impaler. Historians have attempted to reconstruct his life and painted him as a heroic patriot. There are, of course, conflicting versions concerning key events, most importantly, just how he was killed and where his remains are buried. One fact does emerge from all this material. Whatever Vlad might have been, nowhere is it stated that he was a vampire. That association is clearly the result of the fact that Bram Stoker decided to use the name Dracula for his villainous count, much, I must admit, to the disgust of many Romanians who see his novel as a denigration of one of their national heroes. What extent, therefore, did Bram Stoker actually base his Count Dracula on Vlad the Impaler? For many people today, the two have become almost synonymous. The nature of the connection, though, is highly speculative. There is no longer any doubt where Stoker found the name Dracula. We know from his papers, housed at the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia, that by March 1890 he'd already started work on the novel and had selected a name for his vampire, Count Wampire. We also know that, as I stated at the start of our show, in the summer of the same year, while vacationing at Whitby, he came across the name Dracula in a book that is reported to have been borrowed from the Whitby Public Library. William Wilkinson's An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, 1820, contains a few brief references to Dracula who crossed the Danube and attacked the Turks. It was a footnote in which Wilkinson stated that Dracula in Wallachian language means the devil, combined with scraps of Romanian history from other sources, which, by the way, he carefully lists in his notes, that Stoker mapped out a history for his Count Dracula. Wilkinson's is Stoker's only known source for information on the historical namesake. Everything else is speculation. For example, it has been suggested that Stoker drew the concept of staking of a vampire from his knowledge of Vlad's history of impaling his enemy on stakes, or that Count Dracula is repelled by holy symbols because Vlad betrayed the Orthodox Church by converting to Roman Catholicism. Speculation has arisen from the basic assumption that Stoker knew much more about Vlad than what he read in Wilkinson, and that his other major sources were a Hungarian professor and his own readings in the British Museum, both of which are indirectly alluded to in the novel. One account that I found commented that while Stoker did conduct some research at the British Museum, there's absolutely no evidence to indicate that he discovered further material about the historical Dracula. Much of the speculation surrounds the possibility that he may have gained access to one of the 15th century German pamphlets about Vlad the Impaler, with a woodcut portrait accompanied by a caption, "A wondrous and frightening story about a great bloodthirsty berserker called Dracula." This has led some to conclude that Stoker's physical description of the Count Dracula is actually based on this portrait of Vlad. But again, the concrete evidence just is not there. I thought it might be interesting to read you a little of what Stoker said, or actually how Jonathan Harker described his first arrival at Dracula's castle and his first encounter with Count Dracula. It's dated the 5th of May. "I must have been asleep, for certainly if I had been fully awake, I must have noticed the approach to such a remarkable place. In the gloom, the courtyard looked of considerable size, and as several dark ways led from it under great round arches, it perhaps seemed bigger than it really is. I have not yet been able to see it by daylight. When the carriage stopped, the driver jumped down and held out his hand to assist me to alight. Again, I could not but notice his prodigious strength. His hand actually seemed like a steel vice that could have crushed mine if he had chosen. Just as I had come to this conclusion, I heard a heavy footstep approaching behind the great door and saw through the chinks the gleam of a coming light. Then there was the sound of rattling chains and the cranking of massive bolts drawn back. A key was turned with the loud grating noise of long disuse, and the great door swung back. Within stood a tall man, clean-shaven save for a long white moustache, and clad in black from head to foot, without a single speck of color about him anywhere. He held in his hand an antique silver lamp, in which the flame burned without a chimney or globe of any kind, throwing long quivering shadows as it flickered in the draught from the open door. The old man motioned me in with his right hand with a courtly gesture, saying in excellent English, but with a strange intonation, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own free will." He made no motion of stepping to meet me, but stood like a statue as though his gesture of welcome had fixed him into stone. The instant, however, that I had stepped over the threshold, he moved impulsively forward, and, holding out his hand, grasped mine with a strength which made me winch. An effect which was not lessened by the fact that it seemed cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead than a living man. Again he said, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely, go safely, and leave something of the happiness you bring." The strength of the handshake was so much akin to that which I had noticed in the driver, whose face I had not seen, that for a moment I doubted if it were not the same person to whom I was speaking. So to make sure, I said interrogatively, "Count Dracula?" He bowed in a courtly fashion, and he replied, "I am Dracula, and I bid you welcome, Mr. Harker, to my house. Come in, the night air is chill, and you must need to eat and rest." Hi, I'm Peter J. Shield. Welcome back. We're looking at the whole subject of Count Dracula tonight. Was he for real or just a figment of Hollywood's imagination? Is much more likely that Stoker drew the description of the Count Dracula from the earlier villains in Gothic literature, or even from his own employer, Henry Irving. All we know for certain is that Stoker found the name Dracula in Wilkinson, obviously liked it, and decided to use it, combining fact and fiction. While of questionable merit in portraying history, is a great tool in the hands of an imaginative writer. The best example, of course, is Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 rendition of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Although a connection between the vampire count and his historical namesake had been made almost 20 years earlier in the Dan Curtis production of Dracula with Jack Palance. Fiction has made Vlad what he never was in life, a vampire, and has thus granted him, like his fictional counterpart, immortality. Count Dracula was not the first fictional vampire, and vampires had existed in folklore and legend for hundreds of years. Stoker came across some information about vampire beliefs in Transylvania, which he used in the novel. He was also familiar with earlier vampire literature written in English during the 19th century. However, many conceptions and downright errors appear both in print and on television documentaries about Bram Stoker and his famous novel. Let me close our program tonight with 15 of the more widespread ones, with respect to David Letterman. On each of the following is either probably wrong or at best just speculation. Here they are. 1. Dracula originated in a nightmare which Stoker had after eating too much dressed crab. 2. Stoker was a member of the Golden Dawn Order. 3. Stoker was in love with his employer, Henry Irving. 4. Immediately after its publication, Dracula was a phenomenal success. Not. 5. Stoker traveled to Transylvania to do research on vampires. And 6. Stoker died of syphilis. 7. Count Dracula is destroyed by having a stake driven through his heart. 8. Count Dracula cannot go out in the sunlight. 9. Stoker's inspiration for the character of Count Dracula was Vlad the Impaler. 10. Slane's Castle at Cruden Bay was the inspiration for Castle Dracula. Or 11. Brian's Castle in Romania was the inspiration for Castle Dracula. 12. Vlad the Impaler's Ponerian Fortress was the inspiration for Castle Dracula. 13. A Hungarian professor provided Stoker with much information about vampires, Transylvania, and Vlad the Impaler. Nosferatu is a Romanian word for vampire is number 14. 15. Bats are common phenomena in the Carthaginians. Dracula, Sense and Nonsense is your answer. In that book, you'll find Elizabeth Miller's account of just what's for real and what isn't. And you'll find that, of course, in Amazon.com or any of the web stores. That's Dracula, Sense and Nonsense, published in the year 2000, and the author Elizabeth Miller. I'm Peter J. Shield. Thanks for joining us here on VegasWebcast.com for My Vegas Mysteries.